What if I told you an entire generation was raised on a promise that quietly expired the moment they graduated? Told they were special, told effort equals outcome, told follow the path and stability awaits, then handed a world where the path had been paved over, and nobody bothered to update the map. This isn't about avocado toast. It's about a psychological experiment nobody signed up for. And the subjects? Millennials. Born between 1981 and 1996, millennials are the first generation in modern American history statistically expected to be worse off than their parents. Pew Research confirmed it in 2020. Not projected, not feared, confirmed. Let that sink in. For centuries, the American story was one of incremental progress. You might not be rich, but you'll be more secure than your parents. Then, without ceremony, that contract dissolved. Imagine your entire childhood soundtrack was you can be anything. You internalized it, you hustled, you checked every box. Then you walked across the graduation stage in 2009 or 2010, diploma in hand, $60,000 in debt, and stepped into a job market that had vaporized 8.8 million positions. That collision has a clinical name, cognitive dissonance. But lived, it feels like vertigo. Like running a race where the finish line keeps retreating and someone keeps handing you heavier shoes. Millennials weren't just in the self-esteem movement, they were its test subjects. Helicopter parenting, participation trophies, you were smart just for trying. These weren't malicious, they were well-intentioned applications of 80s, 90s psychology, designed to shield kids from the insecurity their parents felt. But here's what that created. A generation taught their potential was limitless, while the economic runway beneath them was quietly being shortened. Then, 2008, the floor fell out. And just as they were trying to rebuild footing, social media arrived, not as a toy, but as a mirror. Facebook launched in 2004, Instagram in 2010. Gen Z got these platforms as children, digital natives, but millennials, they got them as young adults, right as their identities were crystallizing. Psychologist Gene Twinge's research uncovered something haunting. Millennials score higher on narcissism scales than previous generations, and simultaneously higher on anxiety and depression. Why? Because they were taught you're extraordinary, then handed a world that treated them as utterly replaceable. A trauma response with a LinkedIn profile. A generation performing confidence while quietly wondering, what if I'm not special? What if I'm just stuck? Now layer this. The milestones that used to anchor adulthood, home ownership, marriage, kids, have become mathematically improbable for millions. Not by choice, by spreadsheet. In 1980, the median home price was 2.5x median household income. Today, nearly 6x. Student debt has ballooned from $200 billion in 2003 to $1.7 trillion today, with millennials holding 45% of it. So you hit your 30s still waiting for your real life to begin, while paying $2,400 for a studio with a Murphy bed, while watching college friends post wedding photos from Tuscany, funded by parents who bought their first home at 24 for $85,000, while your therapist's next available slot is March next year. Psychologists call the toll of this limbo allostatic load, your body's chronic stress response to bracing for a future that never arrives. You're not lazy, you're not broken, you're living in the loading screen of your own life, and the progress bar hasn't moved since the Obama administration. Here's the quiet betrayal nobody talks about. Millennials were sold a sacred bargain. Study hard, get the degree, earn stability. It worked for decades. It was designed to work. But when millennials showed up ready to honor their side of the deal, college cost 10x more than it did for their parents, adjusted for inflation. Entry-level jobs now demand 3 to 5 years experience. Pensions vanished. 401ks became DIY retirement roulette. Mass layoffs shifted from last resort trauma to quarterly business strategy. Psychologists call this schema disruption, when reality violently contradicts your core belief about how the world operates. And when it happens to an entire generation at once, you don't get entitled complainers.
You get people who still believe in fairness, but no longer believe it applies to them. That's not cynicism, it's pattern recognition, which explains why millennials get roasted for job hopping while corporations quietly killed workplace loyalty first, why they're called entitled for expecting healthcare, while gig apps classify them as independent contractors to avoid providing it. They didn't break the social contract, they just noticed it was already broken and stopped pretending otherwise. And let's talk about the invisible tax nobody itemizes, the performance economy. Millennials didn't just adopt social media, they grew up learning to curate themselves for an audience while becoming adults. Dr. Tim Kasser's research on materialism and well-being shows something critical. When self-worth becomes tethered to external validation, mental health deteriorates, even when you're getting the validation. Why? Because the algorithm never says you've done enough. It just whispers, what's next? So you're not just working a job, you're running a 24/7 PR campaign for your own existence, crafting the highlight reel while quietly drowning in the bloopers. The vacation photo with 200 likes, taken 3 days before you cried in your car because your student loan servicer auto-dialed you during dinner. That dissonance isn't weakness, it's the psychological toll of building a personal brand, while your actual life feels increasingly precarious. So here's the pivot nobody gives millennials credit for. Yes, they question authority because they watched banks get bailed out while their student debt became permanent. Yes, they demand meaning at work because they saw their parents grind 40 years for a gold watch, then get laid off at 58. Yes, they normalize therapy because they're the first generation to treat mental health like health, not moral failure. This isn't fragility, it's adaptation. In a world that moved the goalposts, then blamed them for not scoring, they started asking, what if the game itself is rigged? And that question? That's not entitlement. That's the birth of critical consciousness. Millennials aren't failing adulthood. They're redefining it under conditions their parents never faced. Delayed homeownership isn't laziness. It's rational response to a housing market that detached from wages in 2000 and never looked back. Career pivots aren't flakiness. They're survival in an economy that treats loyalty as a liability. They're not behind. They're navigating uncharted terrain with a map drawn for a different continent. And let's name what gets ignored. Millennials are the most educated generation in history, the most racially and ethnically diverse, the first to grow up with the internet as a utility, not a novelty, which means they've seen multiple versions of truth and learned to interrogate systems instead of obeying them. That gets labeled difficult, but critical thinking meeting systems never designed to be questioned will look disruptive. They're also the generation handed climate collapse as a side quest, told you must fix this while holding less political power and wealth than any generation since the Depression. Existential dread with a side of helplessness, yet they still show up, still vote when not suppressed, still build community gardens on vacant lots, still foster rescue dogs in apartments they'll never own. That's not resignation, that's quiet, stubborn hope, practiced not as a feeling, but as an action. So, the next time someone asks, why are millennials so anxious? Remember, anxiety isn't the problem. It's the symptom of living in a world where the rules changed mid-game, and nobody told you. Millennials aren't broken. They're the canary in the coal mine, showing us what happens when promise collides with precarity. Their exhaustion isn't weakness. It's the rational response of humans handed a map that no longer matches the territory. And if you see yourself in this story, you're not behind. You're not failing. You're adapting with extraordinary resilience to conditions no generation should have to navigate alone. That's not a crisis of character. It's a testament to your humanity. If this resonated, if it felt less like content and more like being seen, hit subscribe, because the first step towards building a world that doesn't make us feel this way is realizing we were never the problem to begin with.